Welcome back. We're here for our second session on Ecclesiastes in our series on wisdom literature. If you missed the first one, I encourage you to go back and check it out. It gives us the primer for what we're talking about today. We looked at the first four chapters last week, and it's a little dark. It feels a little morbid, and we talked about how it's easy to take a very pessimistic read of most of what we have looked at so far. And yet there may be some hope in the midst of what wisdom is written here. So we're going to dive back in with chapter 5. If I can get a volunteer to read.
I'll start.
Okay, thank you.
Guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than the sacrifice offered by fools, for they do not know how to keep from doing evil. Never be rash with your mouth, nor let your heart be quick to utter a word before God, for God is in heaven, and you on the earth. Therefore let your words be few. For dreams come with many cares, and a fool's voice with many words. When you make a vow to God, do not delay fulfilling it, for he has no pleasure in fools. Fulfill what you vow. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not fulfill it. Do not let your mouth lead you into sin. Do not say before the messenger that it was a mistake. Why should God be angry at your words and destroy the work of your hands? With many dreams come vanities and a multitude of words, but fear God. If you see in a province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and right, do not be amazed at the matter, for the high official is watched by a higher, and there are yet higher ones over them. But all things considered, this is an advantage for a land, a king for a plowed field. The lover of money will not be satisfied with money, nor the lover of wealth with gain. This is also vanity. When goods increase, those who eat them increase, and what gain has their owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of laborers, whether they eat little or much. But the surfeit of the rich will not let them sleep. There is a grievous ill that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owners to their hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. Though they are parents of children, they have nothing in their hands. As they came from their mother's womb, so shall they go again, naked as they came. They shall take nothing for their toil, which they may carry away with their hands. This also is a grievous ill. Just as they came, so shall they go. And what gain do they have from toiling for the wind? Besides all their days they eat in darkness, in much vexation and sickness and resentment. This is what I have seen to be good. It is fitting to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun the few days of the life God gives us. For this is our lot. Likewise, all to whom God gives wealth and possessions, and whom he enables to enjoy them, and to accept their lot and find enjoyment in their toil, this is the gift of God. For they will scarcely brood over the days of their lives, because God keeps them occupied with the joy of their hearts.
Okay.
Work hard, eat, drink, and be merry.
Yeah, it's similar, but we get a little bit more of the traditional wisdom here in this passage, especially at the beginning, right? Like guard your steps, don't make a vow, and it's better to not make a vow than to make a vow and not follow through. Which we get Jesus saying some similar things, a lot of that same pattern of wisdom in the New Testament from Jesus. We get this. Better for you to do this, which seems like a not very good thing, than to do this and have this happen, right? So here's that same kind of pattern. the sort of wisdom of a dichotomy. Two options, it's better to not have one at all. Ignoring obviously the best is to make the vow and keep it, right? Presumably. But of course, there's sort of a pragmatism in the idea of don't make vows because you might not be able to keep them. Let's see, what else? What else jumped out here? There's a lot in here about economic justice.
Lester, could you read 12 again?
I sure can. Sweet is the sleep of laborers, whether they eat little or much, but the surfeit of the rich will not let them sleep.
Yeah, yours is the same word. What does the word surfeit mean?
I think it has something to do with rest, but let's have Google tell us. Do you have a different translation? You have surfeit too?
Is it the same word?
Yeah.
An excessive amount of something.
What?
An excessive amount of something. So the excess.
Amount,
Yeah.
amount of penance to the rich will not let him sleep.
The excess of the rich. So all the excess stuff they have will not let them sleep.
Why? Because he's worried about it?
There's perhaps, or just simply, depending on how it's being interpreted, it could be that those things don't aid sleep, or it could be that but worrying about stuff prevents sleep. The one way to read verse 12 is no matter how much or how little laborers have, they'll still get good sleep because they work hard. We all know what, you go have a long hard day or a good workout or whatever, and then when you go to rest, it's usually a good deep sleep. That's pretty common pattern, right? Whereas especially in our scripture, because the divide between the wealthy and the poor, because there is really no middle class in this time period, is pretty significant. And so the people who are at the top don't have any need for labor at all, to do labor, right? As one of the revelations I had when I was visiting ruins in Israel were to go down into the cisterns, not just to look at them, but actually walk down to the water level wherever it was at the time. When we were there, it was actually at a time of year when the water was very low. So some of these cisterns in the towns and cities, you had to go down these stone hand-carved steps that don't have safety rails. There's no precautions in place unless they were added by the modern whoever was keeping up the site. And a lot of them, by the time I would get down to the water level, I'd be exhausted. And now granted, this is with a group and we're walking all day everywhere, so I was already pretty
Coming
tired.
up must have been a real chore.
It was. And there was one that was particularly deep, and as I was coming up out of it, that was the thought that occurred to me. First I thought, can you imagine, this is exhausting enough, but can you imagine hauling a jug of water or a pole on your shoulders with two big heavy buckets of water or whatnot? And then it occurred to me, there were probably people who never had to make this journey because they had someone to do that for them. And the economic injustice of that reality just struck me really hard. This is water. Every person needs this to survive. And yet, if you're wealthy, you have people to do this tedious task, this exhausting task for you. But if you're sick, you better have someone you can rely on to do this. If you have a physical impairment, you better have someone you can rely on to do this. Just a broken toe, and that would have been an impossible task. Because those cisterns were just so deep and required so much physical labor. And it really got my mind thinking for years to come after that about noticing the economic injustice of things we often see as very normative. Because I imagine that the Israelites generally found that as perfectly normal, right? This is just the way things are. And yet, today, if you said, well, that lady living in that house over there, she's got a broken toe, so she's probably going to die of dehydration. Oh well. Meanwhile, the local general or the local captain of the guard never has to make that trip because he's got slaves or servants that do it for them. I mean, we'd be deeply appalled at that reality today. And yet, for them, it was probably no big deal. I mean, here's Ecclesiastes writing, and he's talking about economic justice, so he's actually recognizing it. He's seeing it, and he's making a point of writing about or speaking about it, and it's later getting written down. And yet, what is his answer here? I mean, we'll go back to 8 here. If you see in the province the oppression of the poor and the violation of justice and right, don't be amazed. I mean, here's somebody who's actually who has a platform and has taken to addressing it, and his response is, yep, that's normal.
Keep going to number 9. I'm not understanding.
Oh, sure.
He's quite talking about that.
Do not be amazed at the matter, for the high official is watched by a higher. In this case, I presume he means God. And there are yet the king. And then higher than the king is God. But all things considered, this is an advantage for a land. Oh, okay, yeah. So this is the one. There's a notation, a king for a plowed field. I have a notation that the Hebrew here is ambiguous or uncertain. Let me see if I have. This is 5. See if I have an answer from Michael Fox. Verse 9. Well, it looks like he skips right to verse 11. Which I'm gonna skim this real quick, but because I don't think he addresses it. If he's skipping over that, it's probably just that the what we have lost in the interpretation of Hebrew, or what scribal error was made early on that kept getting copied on down to us, means that we just don't know. So here, the HarperCollins Study Bible says, there's no satisfactory explanation of this verse, given the complications of the Hebrew. It may mean that the land should be obtained only for its advantage or yield, and not merely to possess. So,
And that's really interesting, because I had just a quick interpretation as we read it the first time, and I thought, well, that makes sense. If you've got an ordered society, having a king overseeing it is probably an advantage to having chaos and nobody controlling order.
yeah, I mean, there's a question of hierarchy. Like, is high. Of course, in our modern world, we wrestle with whether or not hierarchy is actually valuable, because we've learned that the problem with hierarchy is that it's twofold. The person on the top has too many people to keep track of, and you can pass the buck too easily, especially as you get close to the top. And that system produces the second problem, which is corruption in a hierarchy tends to grow.
That's the problem, is the hierarchy corrupt or are they benevolent?
Which you almost never see a truly benevolent hierarchy.
Yeah.
Because, so if you have a benevolent person at the top and some of the people under them are corrupt, then they pass the buck every time they get in trouble to the people below them.
Sometimes the system can produce benevolence.
The system can?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
If
Got
it's
an
the right
example?
system, huh?
Do you have an example?
Yeah, I think democracy is overall benevolent.
I'd like to think
I mean,
is.
if you look at the progress of society, I mean, you're talking about, I was thinking about, as you were talking about how a poor person couldn't survive if they had any kind of any kind of event in their life that prevented them from carrying out their daily activities, which is probably true. Today, that's generally not true.
Right.
It's still true in parts of the world, and I'm sure it's still true in our society in areas. But overall, it's the system of government, primarily in the Western world, is more benevolent than what existed 2,000 years ago. And I was thinking also back, and this is years ago, I read Alexander the Great, and one of the things that always struck me about the story of his empire and stuff is that as he conquered places, the book, and I don't know if historically it was accurate or not, but the book emphasized the fact that he didn't just conquer, he wiped out everything that existed in the area that he conquered. I mean, it talks about how he'd go into towns and stuff, and I do research on these cities, and there'd be places of, 20,000 people that he'd just wipe out.
It's probably more complicated than that.
It
Because
is. I mean, I'm
the
grossly
Macedonian
oversimplifying.
army grew through conscription, so that's part of the decimation was largely a subsequent impact of conscription.
But
But
getting,
that was also normative for the time.
but getting back to my point, I think the system of democratic rule, whether it be a republic or whatever, is more benevolent. Certainly, any system can be corrupted with the wrong people.
Right.
But in general, I think the system works.
I want to believe that that's true. I've read too much de Tocqueville, it's interesting because Alexander de Tocqueville is not actually a critic of democracy. He's just very cynical about it. There's the dilemma is especially when we're comparing 2,000 years ago Israel to modern day Western Europe or United States. I mean, we're talking about so many differences: technology, history, language fluency. I mean, there's just the invention of the printing press radically changes justice in culture.
Dispersion of knowledge.
Right. Once knowledge becomes available, and that doesn't have to have anything to do with systems, just being able to get information out. And a good example of that would be to go back and look at ancient Greece. So ancient Greece, prior to Alexander the Great, was a democracy. And there were at times a great deal of corruption and a lot of oppression.
There's a great deal of corruption in
Right.
our democracies today.
Right. And there were also times of great economic advance and times of horrible poverty in ancient Greece, despite having democracy.
I'll accept that.
So I think I'm not saying you're wrong, I just think the picture is much more complicated. And whether or not it's democracy that yields those changes, in contrast with other systems, is probably a subject of debate.
Well,
democracy yields more change. The question is, the question ultimately is going to be whether or not it's a net positive. And the real dilemma is, the answer to that question takes several centuries.
Well, but let's look
We won't be here to see the end of it.
You're right, but you look at the history of the United States in particular. I mean, we've gone from a government created with a, what's the word I want? A humanistic or a concept of goodness of man. And
the concept
well,
of goodness of rich white men. But
it's been debated throughout our history. And we've gone from a society where slavery was accepted. In fact, it was a necessary part of society to make it work, to it being eliminated, to a period of time where segregation still existed, but slowly we're working through that. A time of persecution of the native people of our land, to the understanding that we did that, and there is acknowledgement that that was wrong, and that we need to continue to work with the Native Americans to. And
from some,
I'm looking at this through the eyes of my daughter,
right.
who is really proud of the work that she does, and. I think in general, our system of government works through problems. It takes a long time, and there's ups and downs, and there's you certainly can argue that it's a slow progress, but it is progress.
Yeah, the United States.
So the system improves society.
The dilemma is, and this is often a big overlooked dilemma in the United States in political discussions, is the United States is a bad example to say what is good or bad for humanity. Because the things you have to remember is the United States has vastly superior resources to most countries in the world. I mean, just in sheer amount of land we have per capita is ridiculously large. We were the first to adopt industrialization in the world, and we did it very gung-ho. And that had a huge positive net on our economic situation, which is why we have 4% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's wealth in the United States.
So our adoption of industrialization, wasn't that enhanced because of our political system?
Maybe. That's hard to measure.
It's a chicken and the egg.
It is. Well, and I mean, so there's the counter argument is to look at dictatorships throughout history, especially in the ancient world, that use slavery. And I want to be clear, I'm not advocating for slavery, but on an economic scale, what was accomplished in Egypt, for example, using slave labor, boggles the mind compared to what we do today, even with our advanced technology.
But you're talking about physical progress. You're not talking about the dealing with human beings.
Right. I'm just saying on an economic scale.
You're arguing for slavery there as
not
necessary or as a
an
means to advance scientific progress faster.
Right. I'm not advocating for it. I'm just saying that you can't say, see what we did with industrialization and democracy. How great is democracy when societies that didn't use democracy and didn't have industrialization also did some really great things. Like that doesn't. I'm highlighting that that's not a proof. It's not a. It's a fallacy. I mean, you can say, we have long-horned cattle native to the United States. Europe didn't have those. Our great economic advancement is because we had long-horned cattle. That's not a linear connection. Anyway, complex and way off topic. Ecclesiastes.
Well, the interesting thing is that I mean, this is commentary on how a man should exist in society through a theologic look, I guess. I mean, he attributes a lot of what he's talking about to God.
Right. Well, I don't know if attribute's quite the word. So Ecclesiastes, the relationship between Ecclesiastes and God is tricky, and this is one of the reasons why scholars have had a hard time or fallen into different camps sort of assessing it. We talked about last week how some people look at Ecclesiastes as the model of how horrible life is without God, and others have looked at it from the perspective of Ecclesiastes is just acknowledging the complexities of reality and lifting up the presence of God with us in the midst of it, sort of, so to speak. And so those two camps kind of come into the question of how is Ecclesiastes relating to God, and so I don't know that it's not necessarily that the author here is attributing this to God so much as Ecclesiastes is very much a this is just how things are kind of picture, and so is the talk about God in the midst of this about what God is doing or how great God is or all of that, or is it just simply addressing the reality of the situation, so to speak? So 5 starts out with a lot of talk about God which is more theological than most of the book gets into. So guard your steps when you go to the house of God. To draw near to listen is better than the sacrifice offered by fools, right? So again, if you go in your church and you drop your $6,000 check in the plate and go, look, God loves me, you probably missed something. If you go to the church and drop 2 quarters in the offering plate and you sit down and you are enlightened and grow through the experience of listening to the music and the lyrics and hearing the Word of God and engaging with the community and listening to what the learned speakers or pastors or whoever is present are presenting, there's, according to Ecclesiastes, a greater gain through that, right? So in a manner of speaking, this whole chapter is economic. Where did I leave off here? For they do not know how to keep from doing evil. Never be rash with your mouth. Okay, that gets that. Oh no, that does continue on to talk about God. Nor let your heart be quick to utter a word before God, for God is in heaven, and you upon earth. Therefore, let your words be few. Right? Which is even that second passage is sort of an interesting contrast with the first one, because you're supposed to go to the house of God and listen, but then everybody's supposed to keep their mouth shut. So who are we listening to? Right? But none of this, very little of this has to do with God. It's God's there, but really this is the emphasis is on how to live in the midst of things the way they are, right? Go, listen. Listening's better than sacrifice. Don't go blabbing or just spouting off. Don't make vows unless you're sure you can follow through on them, because God's not going to be happy if you break your vows, right? And again, I mean, that's pretty common of wisdom literature, and that's where what we're at. Is the emphasis is on what do we as people do, right? Wisdom literature rarely is just, hey, this is what God's doing, right? That's more gospel writings, prophets, so to speak. We get that in different kinds of literature.
So verse 3, mine is different than what Lester read. It says, for a dream comes with much business, and a fool's voice with many words.
What,
Yeah,
Business.
business
Three.
versus cares.
I'm sorry.
Three.
Three?
Let me pull up the Hebrew and we'll look at it real quick. It's probably the word work, would be my guess. Ecclesiastes is 5:3.
Yeah.
Okay, service, work. Yeah.
So that isn't a dream when you're sleeping, that's a dream of what your future is like. So you have to work to get to it. Is that what that is?
Again, let me look at the Hebrew for the word dream. It's probably just dream. Yeah. Ordinary dream of sleep, dreams of prophetic meaning, dreams of false prophecy. So it's either it's not. So it's not dream as in like hoping about the future or planning for the future or thinking through your thoughts about the future. So another way we use dream. This is dream as in subconscious thoughts, either through sleep or through prophetic inspiration. And the
So it's with
yeah,
much work.
it's occupation, labor, work. It's the things that occupy us. So many cares is many worries. What did you have? Labor? Business. So it's, is it business or is it busyness?
Well, I don't know, maybe it is business.
Is it have a Y?
No.
Okay, business.
It's business.
No, it's business.
Okay. Well, I don't know what, I don't know, I can't see your translation.
We have the same one, I think.
Okay.
B-U-S-I-N-E-S-S, business.
Okay, so, yeah, it's just the same concept, having a lot that worries you, having a lot to do, having a lot going on, that which occupies a person. So, yeah. So, I think okay, so dreams in Scripture are usually lifted up in positive ways. They're perceived as a good thing. Usually, because they're often association with prophetic language. The perception is often that the belief is often that dreams come from another realm, from God, from the divine, from sometimes ancient cultures believed that dreams came from dark places, or some dreams came from dark places. And so here, dreams are being lifted up as positive. So the argument is the same that we hear elsewhere in this chapter, which is, basically being the average person doing a lot of work, being busy, having a lot to do is a good thing. This is the idle hands are the devil's playground kind of clause. So you're going to get dreams, whether they're prophetic or just dreams from a good sleep, if you have a lot to do. But a fool's voice, person who goes running off the mouth, comes with many words. Right. So the fool's voice is something negative, and so the fool's voice comes from talking too much. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I do have a notation in here that the very last passage, there is a distinction. I'm going to double check this in the Hebrew real quick. I meant to do this before we started and I forgot. Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so the word, so verse 20, for they will scarcely brood over the days of their lives, because God keeps them occupied with the joy of their hearts. Which, in here, that kind of sounds like it's lifting up wealth as being a positive, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right, so,
Well, and did you read 19 and 20 or just 20?
I just read 20.
Because 19 says the same thing. Every man also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot, find enjoyment in his toil. This is a gift of God. So the gift is, if you have been blessed, the gift is God gives you the power to enjoy it.
Maybe. I think the gift here, though, could also be interpreted.
But then Jesus comes along and screws that all up.
Well, so the gift here could also be interpreted the acceptance of your lot. If you accept your lot, whatever it is, you'll find enjoyment in your toil, and enjoyment in your toil is the gift of God. That's the other way to interpret that. And if we're, now this is Hebrew, so it's a little different, but the rule of antecedents is the most recent thing is what it refers to, right?
I would have loved to have been sitting next to Jesus when he was 12 years old and they were studying this,
Yeah, and they asked
this
him.
book.
So the note that I have on verse 20, and it does match in the Hebrew, is the conjunction here that we get, because, which for us is a very causative conjunction, right? It's so that they will not brood over the days of their lives, and that will be caused by God keeping them occupied with their joy in their hearts, right? That because is a very strong word for what the Hebrew actually says here, because the conjunction could be even though, it could be rather, or still, or but, or something like that, or even when. Like, it's a very ambiguous conjunction. So there's two ways to read this passage, that the wealthy won't brood over their lives, but God will keep them occupied with the joy of their hearts, which would suggest that being occupied with the joy of their hearts might not be so positive.
It suggests that being occupied what?
With the joy of their hearts might not be as positive. Might not necessarily be a positive thing. It's hard. It's a little ambiguous. Is all that I'm saying, and it's worth noting that this is again one of those examples we've talked about in the past, how translation, often even of a very simple word, like here is a conjunction word that has a broad scope of meanings, can affect how we interpret this passage. So, you're looking something up.
I just wanted to see in what context Jesus came up with the concept of it's more difficult for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for rich men to enter the kingdom of God.
It's it's in Mark, and it's following the story where the rich man comes to Jesus saying, how can I attain, and I never remember exactly what it is, if it's salvation or righteousness or
It's actually
heaven.
in Matthew, isn't it?
I know it's in Mark. It might also be in Matthew because Matthew copied Mark. We're pretty sure. Which is, and then expounded on all the stories. It's the story of the rich man.
Yeah. Matthew 19:4.
But yeah, so
Pharisees testing him. Oh, that's not it.
Yeah, no. So the rich man comes and Jesus goes through most of the Ten Commandments and says, "Have you done these?" And he says, "Yes, I've kept it all. I've kept the law all my life," or something to that effect. And then Jesus answers him and says, "Then all you have to do is one more thing. Go, give all that you have to the poor, and come and follow me." And then it says, "But the rich man," or the man, "walked away sad because he had many possessions." It doesn't actually tell us if he did it or not. It's ambiguous. But he walks away sad about this. And then there's a discourse between Jesus and the disciples where they inquire about, well, wait a second, you just said for this rich man to enter into the kingdom, he has to give up everything he has. And he says, it's difficult for the rich to enter the kingdom. It would be easier for a camel to walk through the eye of a needle. So, I mean, the context is a rich man who presumably won't give up what he has. He's clinging to wealth. And a number of scholars have pointed out that in the list of commandments that Jesus delivers or asks the rich man, he leaves out two. And I want to say they're the envy commandments, like the jealousy, envy of others, if I remember correctly. And it highlights that Jesus already knows that he's obviously a rich man and he has lived his life by wanting more, wanting what others have. And so he doesn't even broach that concept. And by saying, therefore, you as a wealthy person need to give up what you have, is to amend that breaking of the Ten Commandments. Your envy or idolatry of wealth has to be broken somehow, because he recognizes from the get-go that's the one that the rich man has broken. Okay, that was the biggest. Okay, we're not doing 4 chapters.
I still would have loved to have been sitting next to Jesus when he was 12 years old.
Okay, so chapter 6. Can we do that one?
I can read it.
Thank you.
There is an evil which I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy upon men. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. It is a sore affliction. If a man begets 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but he does not enjoy life's good things, and also has no burial, I say that an untimely birth is better off than he. For it comes into vanity and goes into darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he. Even though he should live 1,000 years twice told, yet enjoy no good. Do not all go to the one place? All the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage has the wise man over the fool, and what does the poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of desire. This also is vanity and a striving after wind. Whatever has come to be known has already been named, and it is known what man is, and that he is not able to dispute with one stronger than he. The more words, the more vanity, and what is man, the better. For who knows what is good for man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? For who can tell man what will be after him under the sun?
Okay, thank you. And now so we had a brief moment of lifting up that seem to be lifting up. If you're wealthy, just enjoy it, right?
Enjoy it.
And now here we're back already to, well, if you're wealthy, you're screwed because somebody else is going to enjoy it.
Well, this is almost, is very similar to one of the previous ones from last week.
It was, yeah, it is. Which, well, I don't want to get into that. And a lot of this is you can almost hear Jesus drawing upon some of this language. I'm trying to remember where it was. There were some things that really kind of jumped out at me from Jesus' ministry. The story, he tells the parable of the man with the barn that gets full, and so he decides to build another barn.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus' response is, and what good is that? You could die tomorrow. And then what are you going to do with all of that, right? Which we had a little bit of that back in like 13, 14 in chapter 5 of you can't take it with you, right? There's that, we get that emphasis. So yeah, we're back to this language of the reality is kind of almost depressing. It's chaotic and broken and whatnot. So you can work hard and accumulate a lot of wealth, but then you're going to have toiled for nothing because somebody else is going to be the one who enjoys it, right? That's almost.
But I think a big part of human nature is a feeling of well-being or happiness when you are able to help somebody else. Don't you think that exists in almost every human being?
And well, you said almost. So they're we know that from psychological ailments that there are people who never experience that, or at least what we label as psychological ailment.
Nothing's always and nothing's never, but
right.
The majority, a significant majority of people have a sense of well-being when they feel that they have helped somebody else.
So this is the altruistic bees conversation.
Yeah.
There's the question is there any such thing as altruism?
Well, I think there is.
So, well, and there's and this is more of a philosophical or language debate. Is the question, the dilemma is if you get a positive feeling, a positive experience out of helping others, did you do it out of an act of goodness toward them, or did you do it for your own benefit? Right?
Well, that's the ultimate question.
Right, and I don't know. So the dilemma is you're asking about feelings, and the question is, how do you know what other people feel? Like, I wrestle with this one all the time. This one bothers me a lot. Like, I know what you can tell me. I know what I can read in a survey, but I also have learned that people lie to themselves all the time and to each other. And when you ask questions about, hey, does doing something good for somebody else make you feel good? If a person didn't feel good, how would they answer that question? I'm inclined to believe that the vast majority of people would lie.
So
I
why
don't know.
why if that feeling doesn't exist in the majority, why do almost all human beings at some time during their life watch out for others? Specifically their family, usually, but it extends beyond that.
Well, and now that gets complicated because now you're getting into a crossover between social science and genetics and
See, going back to 519, I would say the ability to find enjoyment in his toil is a gift of God. Well, the enjoyment comes from sharing. And that's a gift.
That's one way to look at it.
So if you're a rich man and you share, that's a gift. Maybe it's a gift.
Okay.
Maybe it's a gift of God.
Yeah.
Maybe the sense of well-being is a gift of God.
I don't know if I don't remember if Ecclesiastes gets into this. Of course, there's also something we've learned in the modern age, which is when you pass on significant wealth to your children, usually it screws them up pretty good. So
No, I'm not talking about inheritance.
okay, because
I'm
that's
talking
what he's
about-
talking about here, which is you're going to die before you get to enjoy what you
Yeah,
worked for,
I understand that.
and
but-
your kids are going to have it.
Right. That's a whole different ballgame.
Okay.
I mean, that's, you know, that is contrary to as your family's growing up or as your friends are involved in things around them, you make sure you're there to give them a supporting word, or if necessary, $1 here and there, to support them and not to your benefit. Except for maybe the sense of well-being, which is perhaps a gift of God.
Well, so for most of human history, there was significant benefit in taking care of your family, and we've had cultural components that talk about it. Like people had kids so that someone would take care of them when they couldn't take care of themselves. We talk about that now in our culture. There's the running joke of the reason that I put you in diapers and fed you was so that now that I'm in diapers, you can change mine.
Well, there's still truth to that.
There is, right, and
A
so
lot of truth.
that ultimately becomes, and so we're getting into very non-concrete, very abstract concepts. Like how do people feel and why do they do what they do is complicated by the reality that we don't even really know why we do the things we do.
But maybe that's God's gift. The sense of well-being. I read that and it just struck me. Maybe the fact that by
Ignorance
being
is
good
bliss.
to another person, you get a sense of well-being. Maybe that's God's gift.
There are definitely times where I think that notion of ignorance is bliss is might be true. Like so we talked earlier about how cultures often don't recognize the injustice. But centuries later, we can look back and we're appalled at the injustice that often went unrecognized in its present context, which will happen to every generation. 200 years from now, 2,000 years from now, people will look back at the 2020s in the United States, and they will be utterly appalled. Maybe this isn't a good example. They will look back at the 1990s and be utterly appalled by what was going on in the United States at that time. So one could say that ignorance of that fact, ignorance of the reality that there is a lot of bad happening in our present context and always will be, might actually be a gift.
Might actually be what?
A gift. Of course, those who do, but here now is the dilemma in our culture. In this culture, if most people who were ignorant of it didn't have anybody around who either talked to them about their ignorance or exposed them to it in any way. So it was easy to stay ignorant and have that not really affecting anything, right? In our culture, with the exchange of ideas and technology that allows us to communicate, there are and always will be people who are ahead of their time, as Ecclesiastes probably was in his time, who recognize what's going on and will call it out. And then the dilemma becomes, so now in our world, I don't know that we have the option of ignorance anymore, at least in the Western world with our technology. We've replaced ignorance with blithe indifference. So, sorry, I'm being cynical. We're reading Ecclesiastes. Okay, so the economic part, we get that in the first paragraph. When we get to verse 7, 7, is that the one I was looking for? Just give me again. Okay, so 7, 8, and 9 are also kind of talking about possessions, wealth, being satisfied. You know, what you have as your hunger determines whether or not you can ever satisfy your hunger, right? Like, so if you crave $1 billion, odds are you'll never be satisfied. And interestingly enough, we learn that even people who do achieve $1 billion often are still not satisfied. But that's another conversation.
Well, I'd say most of them are.
Right, but it's sort of the element of if you're satisfied with what's in front of you, if your hunger is for what's in front of you, you can be satisfied. If you hunger for what you don't have, then you'll never be satisfied. Is largely what he's saying, which is something that, especially in our culture, not only do we not lift up that concept, we actually promote craving what we don't have.
And there's nothing more evident than that than all of the propaganda around the concept of an adequate retirement.
Yeah. Right.
Do you have enough?
Right.
What's enough?
Yeah.
Well, especially when you start doing the math and calculating inflation, and you're like, I'm never gonna have $4 billion to retire.
Right.
Like, yeah, no, that's a big problem.
And you watch, especially this time of year when they're talking about tax planning and all that stuff. The whole concept of you're not ready for retirement, you're not planning properly. What is the right formula? There isn't a right formula. Every person has their own.
Yep. It's not just money. We do it with careers. We do it with hobbies. I mean, how many people have kids who are planning to be the next? Who's the big sports star? Aaron Rodgers, Michael Jordan, LeBron James. Name your sports star. There's, in the United States alone, there's probably 500,000 kids who think they're going to be a sports superstar, but we only get 1 or 2 a year at the most. Same thing happens in the music industry. It happens with comedians. It happens with actors. It happens with pastors. There are pastors who are like, oh, I'm going to go on and do these great things, and that there's a dilemma because we've talked about this before, because there's an issue there's a tension between what is effective, pragmatic, and productive, and what is good and healthy. So I'll give an example. My oldest child and my wife, when she was a child, did the boxcar derbies. They've gotten big and complicated, and you have to order kits now and all that stuff. But when we were there was a family, I'm not going to name any names, but there was a family who was sort of a legend of the soapbox racing derby world. And every one of his children took first place the first time they raced. He had one child left to go. In the first race, she took second place. Tore her apart. She was throwing things, having a fit. She's bawling. She was yelling and screaming at people. I mean, just destroying.
You witnessed this?
Yes, I was there. I saw it happen. Because the pressure of the ambition and the family history, and both my older siblings got first place their first race, that was all put upon the shoulders of a probably 7-year-old kid. I don't remember how old she was, somewhere in the neighborhood of 7, 8. That she carried all of that burden because of ambition, because of cultural cultural notions and family notions of success and ambition. And to the credit of the parents were there and they were on the spot and they were comforting her and told her everything was fine, it's perfectly okay. There was no negativity. The parents were wonderful. I don't know, and yet it didn't matter to her because she carried so much weight.
I wonder when those parents went home that evening if they reflected on how much pressure they had inadvertently or unknowingly placed on that child.
I wondered the same thing, and I was too polite to ask.
It has to do with how much you praise the success of one of your children and what the other children see in that.
Yeah, it's tricky. Okay, we're past time, but I want to hit one last thing in this last paragraph so we can call chapter 6 a wrap. It's another one I find interesting where it talks about the idea of a dispute with someone who is stronger, right? Like, whatever has come to be has already been named, and it is known that it is known what human beings are, and that they are not able to dispute with those who are stronger, right? So in this case, stronger is probably a word that means a lot of things, not just physically stronger, but can endure more, can survive more, or superior in some way. Hi, we're just wrapping up a Bible study, and then we'll get out of your hair. So you're here at 1:15, right?
Hi.
Okay. And it's interesting because this reminds me of a bit of wisdom that my father gave me when I was in elementary school. I was getting bullied, and it's interesting because this is a repeated theme in probably just in parenting worldwide, but it's particularly apparent in the Western world because we have public education systems and bullying is a little more common and addressed. There's always that question when a kid gets bullied of what are the parents going to do? You have some parents whose response is, well, bully them back or fight back or whatever. You're never going to stop the bully until somebody stops the bully, right? We get the same kind of argument with the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun, right? You know, that's one kind of justice or perception of justice is you have to beat up the bad people in order to stop the bad things, right? Jesus doesn't like that. I'll just spoiler alert. Jesus doesn't go with that model, which is obvious because he never fights back anybody, even though all these horrible things happen. But my father said to me in the car that day before dropping me off at school, and I'm going to clean this up a little bit as much as I can. This is cleaner than my father delivered to me. He said to me that morning, never get in a pissing contest, because the other guy will always have a bigger penis. Which, if you know anatomy, that has nothing to do with being able to pee, but it's a quote that stuck with me all my life about how you engage with other people. And here, how do you engage with people who are stronger than you, right? Ecclesiastes is setting this up as, again, like he always does, this is just the reality of things. Which is like my father doesn't actually know who the bullies are, so he doesn't know the situation. Better not know what a bunch of elementary school kids have in their pants. But the point is the same. There's going to be people stronger than you no matter what. There's going to be people smarter than you. There's going to be people richer than you. You don't have to strive against those things. It just is what it is, which is sort of Ecclesiastes' point. And if we're looking at the philosophy of this whole book of the Bible, it's what he's setting up is sort of the philosophical view of the world. If you see the world as somehow failing to be what you want it to be, right? You're going to be miserable. If your hunger is for what you don't have, you will never be satisfied. If you perceive the world as suffering, you're going to feel like you suffer. If you look to your wealth or possessions or whatever it is you have and say, well, that just means I need to have more, you're going to have an unpleasant life. But even the poorest person can delight in their labors and the good sleep that comes from it, right? There's Ecclesiastes philosophy is, if you accept what is, life is better than by constantly fighting everything that is in reality. Now, sometimes we run the risk of calling that indifference.
But that's pure philosophy. I mean, he weaves the concept of God or greater being into all that.
Right, but what's interesting is if we look at how God is interwoven in this, remember that we talked about this with chapter 5. God is, and theology is interwoven into this philosophy in the sense of, and God is over all of this, right? And the little bits we get from Ecclesiastes about what God favors or doesn't favor fits his philosophy, right? At least the way he presents it is God's engagement with this is to favor the people who accept their lot in life. God's favor in this is to prefer the people who don't make vows than those who try to do something that they can't do and then break that vow, right? There's a consistent pattern in all of this. There's a quote that I really love from, I don't know what it was. He was part of the church, Meister Eckhart, who described the concept of death. And this has been badly twisted over the years, so this is probably a bad quote. But he said something along these lines, that at the moment of our deaths, if we perceive the experience of death as bad, as tearing us from our life, from our loved ones, from destroying what we've tried to accomplish, what we've done, the life we've created, we will see demons tearing us away from what we love. But if we accept and let go of what was, the demons become angels carrying us on high. And it kind of fits in with the philosophy of Ecclesiastes, which is you do what you can do and accept that that's good. You know, you don't set up impossible goals, but you get up every day and you go to work. You get up every day and you toil. And then you have your good night's sleep and you enjoy what you have. And that's hard for people who are in a good place, because when you're in a good place, it's easy to want more. But for those who are struggling and suffering, Ecclesiastes speaks very positive words of, like, it's okay to accept things the way they are. It's okay to live into the struggle and the difficulty and the pain, rather than to have to fight against the idea that somehow what's happening to you is unjust, unfair, broken, and a sign of a broken creation and the absence of a God, or anything along those lines. We're way over. We're going to close with the Lord's Prayer, and then we'll get out of our next committee's hair. So, our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
Hello?
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Hi.